Thank you so much for coming, everybody. It's really good to see a packed out room, the fourth lunch session put on this week by the Bristol University Christian Union. As hopefully you've all seen from the hoodies and the signs and the flyers and the incredible new design of these stick things. Jesus, worth investigating, is what the CU are holding out to you this week to have a look at for yourself. It is Valentine's Day today, so love is in the air. I wonder how many of you have got hot dates. I'm just going to find out a little bit about Mark. And ask you, Mark, you're married.
Yes.
What did you do for your wife on Valentine's Day?
I wrote a card and left it with Jack, my youngest son, who's 6.5, and told him exactly where it was going to be left, so he knew where to take it this morning to my wife. And 3 minutes later, when I was in my study, I heard him walk downstairs and say, Mummy, you know those drawers in Daddy's study? You won't go looking in them, will you, Mummy? Because you wouldn't want to be disappointed on Thursday, would you, Mummy? I summoned him back upstairs and gave him the card and said, go and give it to your mother now.
Very sweet. Good one, Jack. Tonight, if you haven't got a hot date, the CU are putting on an evening event called Jesus Makes Sense of Suffering, looking at kind of the grittier side of life, the raw side of life that is unavoidable, that people will suffer and go through pain in their lives. It's up in the Wills Conference Centre at Wills Hall, so you can go up there, there'll be people directing you in. So to confirm, it's not on Wills Memorial, it's not in the Wills Centre in CHH, it's not in Jack Wills, the shop, it's up the hill, so make the effort to go up there, and if you're in Stoke Bishop, just crawl out of bed and go along there. So yeah, that's this evening. All week we've been looking at Jesus, and yesterday we had some really awesome stories from students and from some of your peers about who got us to them and why they think that Jesus is worth investigating. You can hear all of our talks online, watch them on YouTube. If you just look up the BUCU Facebook page and have a look through there, so you can hear some of those stories again. But let's get on with the lunch bar. The way it works is you eat your lunch, and then there'll be a 15 to 20 minute talk from Mark again, and then there'll be a time for questions. Throughout the talk, send in your questions to this number up here on the screen, but also at the end there'll be a time to stick your hand up. But yeah, just feel free to ask your questions. If everybody could grab a copy of Uncover, kind of balance that with your forget, and if you could turn to page 124. So Uncover is basically, it's a book from the Bible called the Book of Luke that's been put into this little book for you all to take away as for free as our present to you. And if you go on page 124 at the bottom, it's chapter 19, and it's called Zacchaeus the Tax Collector. So James is going to come and read to us. James is coming up now, and it's just going to be the first 10 sentences, so we'll go over the page. But I'll hand over to James, and then Mark will just go straight for it. Thanks, James.
Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost.
Thank you very much. Do keep that passage open, because we'll be looking at it together. But you're going to get a chance to ask me lots of questions, so let me start with a question for you. Imagine Jesus walking down one of the roads in Bristol, say White Ladies or something like that, and he met a man whose life on the one hand was one of immense sporting talent, you might think that's you, and international fame, but on the other hand had descended into a catalogue of infidelity, verging on alcoholism and suicidal tendencies. What do you reckon Jesus would say to somebody like that? Somebody like Jason Robinson, the great England rugby player back in the 1990s. Or what if Jesus met a criminal? Somebody who perhaps had been heading for the very top of political life in this country, but who, thanks to his pride, came unstuck and ended up serving a sentence in Belmarsh prison. What would Jesus say to somebody like that, to a Jonathan Aitken character back in 1997? Or what would Jesus say if you met a second-year undergrad who was doing lots of stuff and had lots of dreams, but if he was honest, wasn't quite sure of the destination and wasn't quite sure what he would do when he got there? What would Jesus say to someone like me back in 1990? The passage that was just read for us from Luke's Gospel tells us that Jesus' answer would be the same to each one of us. Jesus would say this, he'd say, I want to know you. Jesus would say, I want to be with you, so come and follow me. Jesus summarises his great mission in the very last line of that reading. Did you notice it, verse 10? Jesus says, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. The Son of Man was Jesus' favourite way of talking about himself. It's a title from the Old Testament that speaks of a universal, uncontested, divine authority. And Jesus says, that's who I am. You might want to ask questions, rightly, about what the evidence is for a claim like that. But if we want to know what business the Son of Man is in, Jesus says, please don't think search and destroy. No, think instead, search and rescue. I've come to seek and to save lost people like Jason Robinson, like Jonathan Aitken, and like you and me. So let's look at three things. First, we're going to notice the people that Jesus saves. It's sometimes easy, isn't it, to see people who look very lost. Take somebody like Amy Winehouse. A beautiful voice, international stardom, which brought great wealth. And yet somebody who was tangibly lost, day after day, filling our newspapers with her brokenness, until she tragically broke her own life. Sometimes it's a lot harder to see who's lost, isn't it? Take the newspaper story I read a while ago of a successful career woman who jumped 100 feet to her death. Why would Cathy Ward, a successful, popular, attractive lawyer for Rolls-Royce, why would she leap 100 feet from the 4th floor of a smart London hotel? Her friends and her neighbours were baffled. Why would a woman who seemed to have it all end it like that? It's just one of lots of tragic stories I could have got from the newspapers about somebody who was outwardly successful, financially comfortable, and yet emotionally distraught. Do you see, sometimes lost people look very lost, and yet sometimes lost people don't always look lost. And my guess is, if we'd met Zacchaeus on that day walking down the road, we might be very impressed with him. Impressed by his Armani suit, by the Aston Martin he was about to get into. We might think to ourselves, here is somebody who has arrived. I guess if we dug a little deeper, we might have been a little less impressed, because Zacchaeus, well, what are we told in verse 2? He was an official in league with the hated Roman authorities. He collected taxes for them from among his own people. Today, tax collectors are still unpopular, aren't they, 2,000 years later? They're unpopular because they take our money legitimately, legally. Back in Jesus' day, tax collectors were unpopular because they took the money from Jewish people illegally and illegitimately. They'd have ripped them off and lined their pockets. And Zacchaeus wasn't just any tax collector, was he? What does verse 2 tell us? He was the chief tax collector. He was the ringmaster. He was the gang master, if you like, of all those crooks. So people who knew Zacchaeus well, they knew that verse 7, he was a sinner. A little extra tax here, a little surcharge over there. But although he was a crooked official on the make, he was a very, very successful one. Do you see, lost people don't always look lost. And Jesus defines his lostness. Did you notice in verse 9? Because if meeting Jesus brings salvation to Zacchaeus' home, then it means, doesn't it, that it wasn't there before. Now, here's a Jewish man. He'd have been brought up in a religious home. He'd have been taught about God. He'd have been taught about right and wrong. You might relate to him. But long ago, he turned his back on all of that to such an extent that when Jesus sums up his life, he uses just one word. He says he was lost. It's Zacchaeus' greatest problem, and it gives a point of comparison between him and every one of us in this room today. You see, as somebody rightly pointed out to me on Tuesday, you and I might not be as immoral as a tax collector. We might not be as hated as a tax collector. But Jesus says if we're not committed to following him, then Jesus' verdict, the verdict of the most loving man who ever walked the earth, Jesus' verdict is that we are every bit as lost as Zacchaeus. And you might want to ask why that's the case. And that's why Christians love verse 10, please notice. Because it tells us that the whole reason that Jesus was born, the whole reason why Jesus came to earth was to seek and to save the lost. Let's pick up the story at verse 3. Zacchaeus wants to see who Jesus is. And literally, he was seeking Jesus. But because he's a bit of a shorty, he can't see over the crowd. Lots of us will relate to that. But that doesn't stop this resourceful man Zacchaeus. Notice what he does. He runs on ahead of the crowd. He beats them to where Jesus is heading, and he climbs a sycamore tree. Now, not the best seat in the house, but notice Zacchaeus wants to see the man everyone's talking about. And as we read verses 3 and 4, I guess we get the impression that it's Zacchaeus who's doing the seeking, don't we? But by the time we get to verse 5, notice it's Jesus who's doing the seeking. Zacchaeus gets much more than he bargained for, doesn't he? Because what happens? Well, Jesus reaches the spot, and he looks up and says, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. I wonder what you'd have done if you'd have been up the tree. Zacchaeus, I reckon, almost falls out of the tree at that point. It seems like it was a very big crowd, a very big procession, but all of a sudden it stopped, and Jesus fixes his eyes on just one person. Somebody who is lost and hated. And Jesus says, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your home today. Notice come down. Notice the urgency immediately. Notice the intimacy. He refers to him by name. Zacchaeus thinks he's seeking Jesus. But all along, Jesus has been seeking Zacchaeus. And I guess there are, as you heard yesterday, there are lots of Christians in this room who could echo that kind of testimony. I remember when I was at your stage at university, I remember talking to my Christian friends. I remember arguing with them. I remember asking them questions. I remember reading lots. I remember debating with them. And all the time, I was pretty sure that I was the one checking out Jesus. I was the one seeking. And all the time, I was blissfully unaware that Jesus was seeking me. Perhaps you've been coming along to events during this week. Perhaps you've been talking to a Christian friend for months and months. Perhaps you're here today and the very first thing you've ever been to. Or you're interested in finding out more about who Jesus is. Perhaps it's slowly beginning to dawn on you. And you're discovering you've got much more than you bargained for. Because you can't stop yourself being drawn to this person, Jesus. Perhaps like me, you aren't seeking anyone when you came to university. But Jesus is seeking and saving the lost. And I was in your shoes when somebody did a talk a bit like this and told me about who Jesus was and told me about what Jesus had done. And for the first time in my life, I realised that I was lost. I realised that I'd lived in God's world without reference to him. I'd rejected the God who made me. And for the first time in my life, I heard that Jesus had come to seek and to save the lost. He came to do that by dying on a cross and by rising from the dead 3 days later. Again, you might want to text in and ask questions about how on earth his death and resurrection can save us. And you see, being a Christian is not the result of our family heritage. How many times you used to go to church as a child? Being a Christian isn't the result of our intellectual ability or the result of even how willing we are to explore Jesus. Being a Christian is all the result of Jesus seeking and saving the lost. Saying, Mark, I must come and take up residence. Mark, I must come and stay in your life today and tomorrow. So verse 6, notice Zacchaeus comes down at once and he welcomes Jesus gladly. And if you've been looking into Jesus for a while, if you've been reading the Uncovered Gospel, you might think that's a natural response. As you've been investigating and you've been captivated by Jesus' godlike character. You've been struck by his godlike claims. You've perhaps been wowed by his godlike conduct. Zacchaeus' response seems very natural. But Jesus' conversation with Zacchaeus, it sends shockwaves through the crowd. You see what happens, verse 7? They begin to mutter. They begin to grumble. They say, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. Because they think Jesus, he's a holy man. And holy people don't want to hang out with lowlife like Zacchaeus. It'd be like the vicar having tea with a drug dealer, wouldn't it? Or a murderer or something like that. Now, notice Jesus doesn't wait for people like Zacchaeus to come to him grovelling on their knees with apologies. Jesus seems to go and find those kind of people. Zacchaeus is up a tree. Jesus finds them, and with open arms he seems to want to show them God's love. He doesn't say, Zacchaeus, say sorry, and then we'll have a chat about your relationship with God. Zacchaeus doesn't say, look, Jesus doesn't say, Zacchaeus, change your life. Get along to synagogue a bit more regularly. And at a later date, we'll chat about heaven. Now, please notice Jesus says, Zacchaeus, I must come to your house. I must. Literally, it is necessary. Zacchaeus, it is necessary for you to be saved. But please don't make the mistake of thinking this was an easy thing for Jesus. It was very costly. If we've seen the people that Jesus saves, notice secondly the cost that Jesus bears. You see, Luke uses that little word must elsewhere in his gospel when he talks about the fact that Jesus must die on a cross. It's as if when Jesus opens his arms to welcome people back to God, it was necessary for them to be nailed to a cross, to pay the price those rebels owed. To take God's just punishment that wrongdoing demands. Jesus must come to Zacchaeus' house, but that means he must go to bear Zacchaeus' punishment. See, that's the cost to Jesus of saving lost people. People like you and me. We might not be an embezzler like Zacchaeus, but we know our own hearts, don't we? We know our own lives. And I guess if we do, then we know we don't naturally deserve friendship with God. Even beneath these smart Bristol facades, these smart Bristol exteriors, there's much we regret, isn't there? There's much we hide from other people. There's much that makes us lost. Much that if only we dared to look would make us really see how lost we were to God's love. And yet the great news of Jesus is that God sends his Son to seek and to save the lost. Elsewhere, the New Testament puts it like this. It says, great verse for Valentine's Day. It says, God shows his love to us in this way, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And notice, not when we promised to try harder, but not when we said we believed, not when we went to church regularly, but while we were still sinners, while we were still living in God's world without reference to God, Christ died for us. If you understand nothing else today, if you understand nothing else this week, please get this, that God is a God of grace, a God of inexhaustible, unquenchable, undeserved love. He sent his Son Jesus to die on a cross to bear that cost, so that you and I could be accepted just as we are, without having to clean up our act. Isn't that breathtaking? To have somebody who knows you just the way you are and is still for you, still wants to have a relationship with you. If we will only turn to God and trust in Christ, then we can enjoy the kind of acceptance, the kind of fresh start that Zacchaeus enjoys here. Someone asked me the other day, how on earth do we do that? Can I say, there's no magic formula, which I'm grateful for. There's no one way of doing it. There's no one prayer to pray. It could be as simple for you today as saying the 3 words that I try and teach my kids. Sorry, thank you, and please. We could say, sorry, God. Sorry for living in your world without reference to you. And sorry that means we're lost. We can say, thank you, God, that you sent Jesus to seek and save the lost. Thank you that Jesus died on a cross so I could be welcomed home with open arms. Please, God, please help me to follow Jesus from now on. The people that Jesus saves are lost people. And it's great news, let me say, because it means it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you've done. No, but because of the cost that Jesus bears, any one of us can be forgiven. Any one of us can turn to God today and say, sorry, thank you, and please. Because such is God's grace that he would hear and answer that prayer, and we would never be the same again. And that takes us to the last thing to notice today. We've noticed the people Jesus saves, the cost Jesus bears, then notice the transformation that he brings. And here the point is this, I think, that Jesus, in his great kindness, doesn't just love us enough to accept us as we are. He loves us enough to change us. He loves us enough to transform us from the inside out, to recreate us as the people we should be. Oh, I can't go into all the details about that. Again, ask questions about what that looks like if you want to. I guess we could say it's the ultimate makeover. Anybody into that kind of program, Grand Designs, where a poor couple are going to buy a derelict hut in the Hebrides or something, and it's unfit for human habitation, and then we watch as the program goes on, and bit by painstaking bit, they turn it into something of real beauty. Jesus wants us to know that's the business he's in, but with people, not buildings. Bit by bit, Jesus transforms us and makes us more like him. And there are two aspects, and Zacchaeus shows us both of them. Notice the change of lordship. But when Jesus tells Zacchaeus to come down, what does he do? He does just as he's told. Verse 6, Zacchaeus welcomes Jesus gladly, joyfully. And although other people are grumbling, verse 7, notice Zacchaeus stands up and says to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions away to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'm going to repay them 4 times what I took from them." You see, up until that moment, Zacchaeus had been running the show, hadn't he? He'd been the boss. He'd been the one deciding how he lives his life. But all that changes when he meets Jesus. He obeys him, and he receives him as his Lord joyfully. And that change of lordship means a change of life. See, how else would you describe verse 8? It's a miracle, isn't it? That this money-grabbing, money-loving tax collector could turn around and give away half of his fortune, and could say he'd repay people 4 times what he took from them, far more than the Jewish law required. You see, when Zacchaeus grasps that God's forgiveness is totally free in Christ, suddenly he can let go of what had mastered him, what had gripped him, that money. So yes, genuine salvation brings a change. It brings a real response. But notice it's not a change or response out of obligation, but out of gratitude for God's grace to us. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. He saves the most unlikely people. Look around. And he transforms us. As I close, just think for a moment about your hall, would you? Think about the personality clashes that are there. Think about the politics. Think about the petty jealousies and pride. Or think about our society. Think about the rising crime and injustice. Think about the breakdown of family. Better still, think about your own heart. All those grudges you cherish and wrong desires. Think about the prejudice that's deep within. Think about the pride. Isn't this the change all of us need? It was the philosopher Bertrand Russell who once said, if everybody was like Jesus, this world would be paradise. I want to change that and say, if everybody was like Zacchaeus, this world would be an infinitely better place, wouldn't it? And we would be infinitely better people. I started by talking about Jason Robinson and Jonathan Aitken. Both of them wrote books to talk about the difference Jesus made to their lives. You can go and buy them and read them if you want to. Even better, in this room today are lots of Christians. They're kind of living books. So you could ask them if you know them, or just grab somebody with a hoodie and ask them how Jesus sought and saved them, and how over the years Jesus has been at work in them to transform them. But best of all, you could experience it for yourself, because Jesus' procession has stopped today, and there's a sense in which Jesus looks you in the eye, and Jesus calls you by name and says, Jono, Robert, Grace, Jen, I've sought you, I've brought you here this lunchtime, and now I want to save you. I want you to welcome me joyfully as your Lord and Saviour. I don't know what you do with that kind of offer. My guess is there are some people here today who go, it's the first I've ever heard of it, to be honest, and I'm not even sure I think it's true. I need time to think. Take the time. But do please think. Read Uncover. That Christianity Explored course down at the Townhouse on Monday night could be a great thing to go along to. Others of you, you'll be Christian, you'll be looking back on the time you accepted that offer, perhaps today with renewed gratitude. But I guess there'll be some people here today who are somewhere in between those two positions. And you're sitting there right now thinking, I have heard this before. I've heard enough. I know it's true. I sense God calling me. And I think I'm ready to accept the offer. God is never more than a prayer away. Because right now, in your heart, you can say sorry, thank you, and please. And if you do pray a prayer like that, then please know that God has heard it and answered it. And that today, salvation has come to your life. Again, feel free to ask questions about that or anything. It's now over to you. Text, scribble questions, hands up, whatever.
Perfect, yeah, so thanks. So we'll give you 2 minutes to challenge yourselves. Please do fill in a feedback form as well before you leave today. But yeah, chat for 2 minutes quickly. Any questions, keep texting and we'll have some time with Mark. That's long enough. So we'll go for a text from the phone, first of all. So we've got a question from Mark, which is, does that mean we have to give away all we have if we want to be a Christian?
Yes, that's right. There'll be buckets by the door. Please give it all away, and you can pick up a hair shirt, and we'll shave your head, and we'll send you to the desert, and you can sit on a rock. No, it doesn't mean that. Okay, please don't record that. If you edit it badly, that'll be a bad thing. Okay, and the church of might be terribly happy. They might be happy with me. I don't know. No, it doesn't mean that. That it is the response, isn't it, of a grateful heart. That will look very different for everybody in this room, I reckon. There will be some people for whom money just isn't an issue in that way. And there'll be some people for whom money is an issue, and you might need to learn to sit looser to it. And for Zacchaeus, it was his great love of his life, wasn't it? And so he was saying it's a decisive demonstration to myself and to others that I'm changing the boss. And that leads into a very distinctive life. And it's probably what he thought he had to do to say to himself, money is no longer your God. Money is no longer the thing that you live for. Again, that'll be different for different people. There will be something for everybody in this room. The one thing you think you're living for above all else. Career, success, money, relationships, academic achievement, family, I don't know what it is. And we might just need to say, actually, when God goes back in the right place at the top, He enables me to love my family, love relationships, in a healthy, good, sacrificial way that makes sense only when He is up there.
Anybody want to come back?
Yeah, is there anyone who wants to ask a question after that or comment? Okay, we'll take a question from the floor.
Anybody sit with anybody just now who asked a very good question and prepared to ask it for them? I've got a friend who...
We'll go for one from the phone here. If God is so great and good, then why on earth would He want us sinners?
One of the aspects of God's goodness, along with His purity and His justice, His hatred of all that is evil, and I don't know about you, if there is a God out there, I want a God who hates evil, and I want a God who loves good, and I want a God who is pure and holy and true and just. If there is a God like that out there, then the amazing thing is the Bible tells us when we see Jesus that He is also a God who is infinitely loving. That God so loved this world, and doesn't that just, it's the most famous verse in the Bible, isn't it? John 3:16, you see it on the motorway bridges. God so loved the world that He sent His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish, but have eternal life. It's the first few words of that get me. God so loved this world. A world that quite much of the time isn't very lovely, is it? And we're not that lovely much of the time. And John 3 says, God so loved this world, God so loved us, that he sent his Son. That ought to take your breath away. It's fitting on Valentine's Day, I think, because the reality is this: you will never be loved like that. You will never be loved that unconditionally. There's always a sense, isn't there, in human relationships where we feel like we've got to conform, we feel like we've got to play the game, we feel like we've got to be the part. God says, I have loved you unconditionally. And I haven't just given you a bit of paper or a card or a ring or something like that. I've given my only Son. Only. It's a small word. But it ramps up the price, doesn't it? My only Son. I said it almost every day this week. I've got 2 sons. If you think I would spare one of Charlie or Jack for you, you are deluded. Okay, let me just say that. I don't care how well we've got on this week, but if you think I would spare one of my sons for you, I'm sorry, you're toast. Okay? God loves us this much that he sent his only Son, his perfect Son, to die in our place. That is the best Valentine's present anybody can ever get.
Cool. We're getting loads of phones on the text, so if we do run out of time, we've got a few more minutes. If we run out of time, hang around with Mark, chat with him, find someone in a hoodie, see if they've got class. If they haven't, maybe grab a coffee with them. But another one. Yeah. How can Jesus dying save us so many years later?
A great question. You'd think it was unbelievable. It was 2,000 years ago, and the Bible tells us it's because of this, that Jesus is infinitely good, and so his death is infinitely, inexhaustibly precious. So it can save anybody before he was around, who was trusting in God's promise to forgive them. It can save anybody after he was around, even 2,000 years later, people like you and me, who say there is nothing that I can do to climb up to God, to make God forgive me. There is not enough religious stuff I could do, not enough moral things I could do. And Jesus' cross stands in the middle of history to say that that one death is so precious that it can forgive anybody who trusts in it. And that encourages me about people in the past, but boy does it encourage me about people in the present. Because it means that you and I can trust that cross still today. When we think of Good Friday, think of Easter Sunday, we can trust in Jesus' death in our place today and know with confidence, humble confidence, yes, because it's not to do with us, but we can know with confidence that we will be forgiven because of what Jesus has done for us. Okay, last one. Should we just leave it to Jesus to save us? So I guess, should we stay at Patry and wait for him to come to us? Yeah, you could do. And it means you miss out on life with him now. I mean, isn't it weird that if God made us and knows exactly how we tick and knows us better than we know ourselves and has a great life lined up for us and knows how best we can function in life generally, that we would want to miss out on that? Just sounds bonkers, doesn't it? But our problem, I think, is this. We think God is waiting to trip us up. We've got this perverse picture of God as a God who is just waiting to stitch us up, to screw up our lives. And I want to say, when you read the Uncover Gospels, where do you get any of that image about Jesus? If God is perfectly revealed in Jesus, as you read this Gospel, please take it away and read it. As you read it, don't you just think, here is somebody I would love to have as my leader. Gentle, humble, compassionate, powerful, fierce anger against injustice, a defender of the weak. Every image we get of God in this book tells us God is for us and loves us and ought to be trusted by us. And I guess the challenge I want to make to you today is, why won't you trust him? What's stopping you, humanly speaking, trusting yourself to a God that is this good? Thank you. Thanks very much, Mark, for that. So that's the end of this lunch bar. Tomorrow there's another one. There's going to be time for questions, kind of a little table, so a bit more interactive, but don't be put off by that.
There's this evening's talk. Tomorrow evening there's an event at Christchurch Clifton, which is the church near the bridge where the carol service is, if anyone was up there. That's called Jesus, the Invitation of a Lifetime. It says why we can take the plunge despite the doubts. Mark doesn't know everything. I don't know everything. Christians don't claim to know everything, but they've decided Jesus is worth investigating and accepting, even though they don't get that. So come along to that tomorrow evening. I'm just going to ask my friend James at the back to stand up and quickly tell something for the international. So listen up if you're international.
If you're an international student here, we've got a pudding party tonight at 7:30, just across the road in the chaplaincy. We'd love to see you. So that's 7:30 tonight.
Perfect. So that's that. Take away the uncovers, and we've got possibly one of the most important questions has been asked on text. I'm going to ask James, who read, to answer it. James, what course did you take at university?
Theology and religious studies.
There we go. Theology and religious studies. Life makes sense now. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you soon. Bye.